This is The Speaking Show. I'm David Newman, and you're tuned in to the #1 podcast for speakers, consultants, and experts who want to speak more profitably. All right, we are here talking human connection, coronavirus, craziness, podcasting, life, the universe, and everything with my buddy Thom Singer. How are you, my friend?
Hey, David, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your show. Ever since you've launched the show, I've had speaker envy of all the cool people you've interviewed.
Well, you are here in the hot seat right now, and you're about 450 some episodes ahead of me. So I definitely want to talk about your fantastic show, Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do. Well, let's start there, because right before we turned on the mics, I said, you've just had such fantastic success with this. Was this your long-term plan? And you said that you're at episode 550 and counting. How did the podcast start? What was your original intention with it? And then what did it evolve into for you?
So 6 years ago, well, 5.5, almost 6 years ago, I came up with this idea I was going to start a podcast because it was a little bit before the hockey stick of everybody who breathes air had a podcast, but they had already become popular. I was maybe a year or two later than I should have been to be a real early adopter. But I was at a rut in my speaking career. I'd been doing it at the time. I'd been in business about 5 years full time. And I had grown and I had grown and I had grown. Then I flattened out. And I was at the National Speakers Association and I was in a breakout session. It was two people speaking. It was Jim Pancero and Ed Robinson. And they had sort of a throwaway line. It wasn't what their speech was about, but they said, if you're ever in a rut, interview 50 successful people, and you can't come out of the other side in a rut because you will be exposed to ideas, theories, nuggets, concepts, and you pick up the ones that work for your business. And so I was a pretty prolific blogger, since 2005. And so I thought, I'll do a weekly series where I interview entrepreneurs and successful business people in a variety of small businesses and see what I learn. And somebody said, Thom, you should do a podcast. So the original plan was to do 50 interviews with entrepreneurs and solopreneurs and just look for ideas. And so I decided I'll do it twice a week for 6 months. 5.5 years later, the show's still going.
Now, you have a real mix of people. I mean, you have a very eclectic mix, which of course, that's the nature of the title of the program, is Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do. In that strategy, are we also perhaps interviewing some prospects or potential prospects or people that we might at some point want to have a door opening relationship with that might lead to other things down the road?
So that was not the original plan. And in fact, when I was starting it, my mastermind group told me this is a bad idea because it'll take you off focus. You need to do these things. You don't need the podcast. And my mastermind group's been around 7 years. So 6 years later, they make the joke every time I get some sort of accolade or get business because of my podcast. They say, yeah, that was a bad idea. Like they realized that they were wrong. However, their negativity about it challenged me that I had to do it right. So going into this, no, my plan wasn't what you just suggested. But over the last 5.5 years, I have been hired by people who I interviewed. So yes, I try to target people who, if they reach out to me, a lot of PR people want to get their people on my show. But a lot of these people are pitching speakers and authors. Well, if I need a speaker and author, David, you and I have 2,000 friends. I could do this show forever just with our friends. So when people reach out, I say, I'm looking for people with more than 250 employees. And the reason for that is people with more than 250 employees have meetings. So yes, that has worked for me. And then the flip side is I also interview my past clients and give them a way to promote their association and the cool things they're doing in their world. So yes, my show has bled into my business, but it didn't start that way.
Let's pivot from the podcast. We'll come back to it because it's so fantastic. Plus, there's a couple recent episodes I want to ask you about. Let's talk about the Thom Singer journey. So if I remember correctly, you started out doing marketing inside of a law firm?
Yeah, early in my career, midway in my career, I fell into services marketing. So I had been in sales and I had a job back during the big IPO boom where I was selling what's called financial printing. And my clients were corporate lawyers in these big tech corporate law firms. And for 3 years, I made a lot of money, had a lot of fun, entertained these lawyers, and then the tech bubble burst. And the company I worked for shut their Austin facility because the number of IPOs in Austin was going to go to zero for a long time. So they wanted to move me to Houston. Houston's fine. My wife was pregnant. We didn't want to go to Houston. This was 19 years ago. And the biggest law firm as my client called me and said, we have an idea. Why don't you come work for us? We don't have salespeople, but we have marketing people. What if we create a hybrid position for you? And my job for the next 5 years at 2 different law firms, but with the same group of lawyers, was marketing legal services.
Gotcha. And then talk about launching the business and your early publishing adventures. I know you have probably half dozen plus books that you created early on. Walk us through that departure and launch.
Well, it actually all happened because of that law firm. Like that job changed my life because the managing partner, who I didn't know, he was a civil litigator. The corporate lawyers were like, we have to have this guy. And they created a position for me. Managing partner was a super entrepreneurial lawyer, still a friend of mine, one of the best legal minds, but also best marketing minds. He said, you're really good at sales and marketing. That's why we hired you. Lawyers suck at it. I want you to create a course for lawyers on how to network. And by the way, they won't get CLE credit for it because you can only get extended learning credits for legal topics. And I'm going to make it mandatory for all 80 lawyers in the firm. And I literally thought they were going to fire me. They were going to hate it. And at the end of that first seminar that I did, a partner who I didn't know very well raised his hand and he said, I have a complaint. And I thought, this is how we do it in a law firm in front of the whole staff and all the lawyers. He said, this is the best training I've ever been to for non-legal skills. You put too much into it. This should be a class a quarter. And in fact, as of now, you're doing a class a quarter. And that's how my speaking career began. So I started training lawyers on how to do business development and marketing. And the more I did it, the lawyers started giving me to their tech clients saying, oh, you're having a users conference. Our marketing guy is really good. You can have him for free. Save a keynote fee. And I was having fun. I was traveling the country. I went to all the offices of the law firm. All the corporate lawyers were plugging me into their banks and their tech firms and other conferences. And one day I was in DC at a tech company after speaking to like 300 people. And the CEO said, why are you here? And I'm like, well, your lawyer's on your board and you didn't have money for a second keynote. And he goes, I know why you're here. He goes, why do you work for the lawyers? And I told him what I did and how I got the job and how much I liked it. And he goes, no. He goes, my ex-brother-in-law is a member of a thing called the National Speakers Association. You're better than he was. You need to check this out. And I literally went back to the office, found what NSA was and said, that's a business? And so it took me a few years, but eventually I decided to make the leap. In fact, I was laid off. I ended up going to work for a consulting firm for several years as their marketing development person. And I got laid off on April 1st, 2009. And I called my wife and said, I'm going to become a professional speaker as of today. And that was 11 years ago.
And she said, what a funny April Fool's joke, Thom. That's great. Where are we going to dinner?
Without question. She was very supportive to me, but I found out 2 years later from a friend of hers that she cried.
Really?
Because she didn't think we could like continue to pay the house payment.
How about that? That's like, I'm going to go run off and join the circus, honey.
She was really, I never knew. She was really supportive and I was successful before I ever heard that she had any doubts. So in today's climate, I'm very impressed because she's 100% behind me. And I'm like, well, I don't know if she's secretly crying or not, but we're a team. We're making this work.
There you go. I love that. Now, talk about your publishing adventures, because I know not only are you an author, but around the same time, like when you and I first met maybe about 10 years ago, you also had this kind of publishing division to your company and you helped other people publish their books. So talk about your publishing journey and then where this idea of starting the publishing division, where that came and where that went.
So when I was working for the law firm and doing, 10 or 15 keynotes around the country for the firm and for clients, I started noticing that if I want to do this for a living, and eventually I did, I have to have a book. And nobody was I was speaking about how do you connect with people. This is pre-iPhone. My keynote eventually became connecting with people in a gadget crazy world. But this was sort of before we got gadget crazy. This is still 15 years ago. I realized I needed a book and no publishing company. I didn't know how to do it. I was writing letters. I was getting rejected. A buddy of mine who's a serial entrepreneur spirited guy, we were on a ski trip and we're driving down the mountain and I'm complaining about wanting to write a book. And he pulls the car over into a rest stop and he says, I'm sick of it. You either want to write a book or you don't want to write a book. You either write a book or you don't write a book. We don't talk about it. And this is before self-publishing was common or popular. And I'd looked into it and I said, to do it, I'm going to need X amount of money. And it wasn't a small number. And I'm going to need a really good editor. And he looks at me, and he's been very successful. And he says, look, I don't mean to be demeaning, but that number isn't that big. And my wife is a communications editor. And he goes, so now you have the money and the editor, shut up. And 3 days later, he sent me a contract for the formation of an LLC called New Year Publishing. And his wife signed on to be my editor. She marshaled me through with a whip to get the book done in like 3 months. She edited it. We self-published it. And Some Assembly Required: How to Make, Grow, and Keep Your Business Relationships sold 30,000 copies over the next several years. So that started New Year Publishing. Over the years, we've helped CEOs. We started trying to help some speakers, but they didn't necessarily always be the best people to work with. So we ended up working with CEOs of companies, helping them get books out as a marketing tool.
So, people like listening to this, and then we have like that backing up the truck sound. Beep, 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 beep. How do you sell 30,000 books?
Well, this was before I was a full-time speaker. So this is maybe 14 years ago. It was a different world. So if you were speaking, and I just told every Rotary Club and Young Men's Business League and Young Women's Alliance locally that I would speak. But 14 years ago, when I would give a speech and I had books to sell in the back of the room, upwards of 30 and 40% of people would come and at least look at the book. Most of them would buy it. And so the thing is that back then, if the speaker was good, they wanted to take part of that speaker with them. Today, it's a little different climate. To take part of me with me, all they have to do is follow me on Instagram or Twitter or subscribe to my podcast or whatever. So book sales back of the room are not what they used to be. So it was also a timing thing for me, is that back of the room, as I started doing paid professional speeches, I would sell them in bulk. And because I own the publishing company, we could sell them for whatever I wanted to sell them for. So sometimes we'd sell them at a loss, sometimes at cost, sometimes for a small profit. And if I could speak to a room of 200 people and they'd buy 100 or 200 books, everybody got a book who came. And so that was part of our strategy. It's a different world today.
Wow, but still very, very intriguing that, moved a lot of books.
Well, and I just laugh because 30,000 copies, a publisher would have loved that, right?
Oh,
and
huge.
No publisher, even to this day, wants to talk to me because I'm not famous enough. I don't have a big enough list. I'm not interesting looking. I look like a bank president. There's nothing about me that looks, interesting. Publishers are like, yawn. And yet, I've written 12 books and I've moved more than 10,000 copies on several of them. Not all of them. But, several of them, we've had very good financial success.
They would pay attention to the 30,000, 10,000 kind of numbers, though, I'm pretty sure.
I mean, I've tried, and they yawn when they look at me.
Hey, good looking. Are you currently getting paid to speak? Would you like to ramp that up? We can help. Book a confidential speaker strategy call with our team at doitmarketing.com/call, and let's see what we might do together. The call is free, but the results may be priceless. Well, let's talk about your evolution in the speaking business, because I know that you've gone through several iterations and several different brands of the Thom Singer value proposition. Initially, it was really about professional services marketing. And then we went through a couple of iterations of this kind of conference catalyst. And walk us through sort of how you pivoted and flexed and had your finger on the pulse of what people really wanted to buy, and then you adapted accordingly.
You make me sound really smart and like a total visionary. So I started off, I talked about services marketing, and a big part of that was your network and your reputation. And so I started speaking on, your network and your reputation. And somewhere along the line early, like maybe before I was even full-time, I started doing something different than other speakers who were talking about business relationships. And that is, I was pivoting it to, I have an idea. How about we make this conference a human laboratory? And I was giving people ideas of what to do at the breaks. And about the time I went full-time, 11 years ago, guess what had arrived? The smartphone. And you would go out to breaks and everybody would be staring at their phones. And I'm a storyteller. So I would tell stories, and I'm not funny, but I'm funny light. And I would make jokes about, when we go out there, if everyone's on their phone, how lame is that? And I had this line about, if you're looking at your phone and you're standing within 5 feet of someone, you're telling them they're a loser because the cool people are somewhere else. And I made a joke out of it, but people would literally go out to the breaks and be scared to take their phones out or something. And I told people, if you have to check your phones, and I honor the fact that we live in a gadget crazy world, Maybe you walk outside or you walk down the hall. That sends a message that says, you people here at this conference are important, but I have something important to do for just a moment. And people would come up to me and go, I gave up smoking so I didn't have to walk outside on breaks, in the winter. And now I have to walk outside to check my phone. And they'd laugh about it. Meeting planners started coming up and saying, you've changed my breaks. And one woman said to me, you're my conference catalyst. And I immediately bought conferencecatalyst.com and I became the conference catalyst. And that was why people hired me. And by the way, 11 years ago, we were in recession. Networking was a hot topic. And so I just kept talking about it. And then meeting planners were like, my boss wants you back next year, but I can't have the same keynote. And I said, well, how about if I am the conference catalyst and I'm there every morning to kick off the day? And that led me to becoming a master of ceremonies for several events. And so I just iterated based on what they wanted, how we could morph together. And repeat clients started coming to me saying, we have an idea. We want to do this facilitated roundtable for 2,000 people, but we don't think we can just put things on the table that says, talk about marketing, talk about, the birds of the feather thing don't work. Let's invent something together. So I started working with those clients. So it sort of changed because my clients realized that I was willing to play.
Very, very interesting. Well, talk about along the journey here, you also did a TEDx talk. And what was the premise of that? What was the outcome of that? Where does that fit into your marketing toolkit? And just give us the whole experience around that. Because I know everyone's like, oh, I'd love to do a TEDx talk. And some people do a great job and it does nothing for their business. Some people do a so-so job and it blows their business up. What's been your experience there?
I wish it blew my business up in a good way. So here's the thing. If you look at my podcast and you look at my TED Talk, neither one is on line with my brand as a speaker. For my topics that I talk about around, engagement and performance, as a success type topic in business and marketing and sales and career, they don't really line up. Now, there's a lot of our peers who are so good at doing everything on brand. That's never been sort of my thing. I do things that, like, I was interested in entrepreneurship. So my podcast became an entrepreneur show. I wanted to do a TEDx talk since they first came out. One of the early TEDx's that came along was TEDx Austin. And now it has since died off. They don't do it anymore. But in the first few years that TEDx existed, it was considered one of the best produced ones ever. And I had the fortune of being in the audience at the first one. So TEDx was brand new. I got to attend. And that was about the time that Brene Brown was blowing up with her TEDx. And I'm like, obviously for my career, I have to do a TEDx on how to connect with people in a gadget crazy world. Simultaneously, after the first couple of years, the TEDx independent organizing committees started to not want professional speakers for a variety of reasons. So it got hard for someone like me to get there. A networking topic seemed fluffy to them. And so I tried for years to get a TEDx, and it took me a decade. And through some luck and right connections, I ended up getting a slot, and they picked me to do a thing that's called the Art of Giving Small. Because David, one thing I did when I started this business full time, actually a little before that, was we started pledging a small teeny % of every check I got to research for children born with craniofacial abnormalities, because my youngest daughter was born with a condition where she had to have her entire top of her skull removed as an infant. And it was a horrible thing to have to go through. A little sideline. She is a senior in high school right now. She's a straight A student. She just got accepted to Dartmouth. So although they removed the top of her skull, it grew back. And, looking back, she has no memory of this. Her mother and I, of course, never will forget. So we wanted to find a way to do something. And over this 14, 15 years, those little donations, plus some clients who have donated when they've heard the story, and some friends who have donated to support what we're doing, it's grown to over $70,000. So my TEDx talk is about, you don't have to be rich to impact a charity. It's compounded generosity. If you do little things throughout, 15 years, all of a sudden it becomes a real number. So I don't speak on charity. I don't speak on that. That being said, I have been hired by organizations who said, our CEO loved your TEDx talk. Or one organization wanted me to turn it into an entire keynote, which I did. But it's not in line. It didn't blow up my career. And the sound on it's a little wonky. Sometimes you're stuck with the production of the TEDx you do does. That being said, I'm very proud of it. And it's a box that I checked that I did a TEDx, and it's a great message.
For sure. Let's talk about this crazy upside down time that we find ourselves in. and I know there's a lot of disruption. We're recording this sort of in, coronavirus crazy town. A lot of folks are looking at whatever their business used to be, coaching, consulting, online, offline, keynoting, emceeing, and they're saying, holy smokes, I got to flex. I got to pivot. Now, hearing your story so far, you are no stranger to flexing and pivoting and innovating and reinventing. What are you seeing in the marketplace, having been the conference catalyst for all these years? Client conversations at these associations and events where they know you and love you and have used you before. What's the finger on the pulse of our industry? And then let's talk about where you might go next and some of the options and ideas that you're evaluating. So first, state of the industry as you're experiencing it.
Well, I mean, this is the craziest time ever. I've only been in the industry since April 2009 as a full-time speaker. Now, if you look at the Great Recession, the worst part was April 2009. When I became a full-time speaker, we were at the worst economy ever. That actually helped me build my speaking career because associations were still having meetings. They just weren't sure if anyone was coming. They were scared. They didn't want to hire an expensive speaker. And I was willing to do it for $1.95 and a chicken dinner because I was brand new and I didn't know any better and I knew, whatever. So I actually started in 2009 and got work because I was scrappy and I was willing to negotiate. I was good enough, I guess. And I had a topic that mattered because everybody in every industry was worried about layoffs. And the way people get jobs in bad times is through connections. So my topic worked for a recession. I was new, I was flexible on my prices, and I grew my business. And as the economy came back, I grew into a higher fee and became established. The problem is now there are no places to go and do this. The meeting planners I talk to are amazed at how many of us are suddenly virtual experts. Like one of my friends said, she wished she had saved every email that talked about how they were a virtual expert. And she said, I don't believe, necessarily that is 100% true or whatever. So I think that the one thing I did is I decided not to just throw a crap load of spaghetti against the wall. At the time we're recording this, we're only 2.5 weeks into the speaking industry got hit 2 weeks earlier. So let's say a month into this crisis. It's too soon to say, oh yeah, I've pivoted. I know what people are saying. Everybody's going to go virtual. I know one thing is true. I had an older dad who lived through the Depression and not as a kid. My dad was born in 1914. So he's an adult in the Depression.
Wow.
And yeah, he was 52 when I was born. So I'm actually a year older now than my dad was when I was born. And I keep thinking, what would it be like to have a baby? And I think, oh my God, my dad's a saint. He died at 99 years old. He had a great life. And he talked about that in his lifetime, from childhood forward, he saw booms and he saw busts. And he said, the only fact in all of that is every boom is going to be followed by a bust. And every bust, no matter how big it is always going to be followed by a big boom. You just have to wait it out and figure it out. So I don't think the speaking business is going away. I think that when we come out of this, there's going to be some changes. 2 meeting planners told me that they think there's going to be a huge price reset, and not for speakers, but for meetings in general. She was talking about the fact that hotels, they used to, if you were bringing in 500, 1,000 rooms or whatever the number was, they would give you a huge discount off of their normal rate. Whereas now they give you a little discount off their normal rate. She thinks they're going to see hotels working with them on really low rates to make coming to a conference affordable. Same thing with the meal prices. For meeting planners, the cost of an urn of coffee is similar to buying a car. So coffee prices for just your coffee break can be more expensive than your keynote speaker if you have a big enough conference. And this one person told me, she said, I used to hire celebrity level speakers 7 years ago for $15,000. She goes, those same speakers want 30 and 40. So she thinks there's going to be a reset. And this isn't picking on speakers. This is the entire meetings world, that there's going to be a reset on what people are expecting. So, I'm open to it. I would rather work than not. And so I'm open to pivoting and being scrappy and making things happen to be able to do what I like to do. I think, this is my prediction, there'll be a lot of changes, but the big change is going to be for these larger conferences, a hybrid option is going to become extremely common. 5-6 years ago, Eliz Green and I started a thing called the Conference Talk Show. And the idea was, if you're doing a hybrid, meaning you have a live event, but you're broadcasting to an at-home audience who've paid a lesser price, but to have a ticket to watch your keynotes and selected breakouts. The problem people had was they were putting them up there, and then when they'd go to coffee break, they would just put up a slide that said, back in 20 minutes or back in an hour. And the home audience would go away and do things, and the numbers would be choppy. So we started a thing where 5 years ago, we were hosting the online broadcast, like a morning talk show. And we'd interview the speakers, we'd interview the attendees. And we did this for, 7 or 8 groups, something like that. But what we found looking back, we were ahead of our time. They loved the idea, but they didn't want to pay 2 hosts to be there because they didn't care about the at-home audience. I think the big change is these live events, when they come back, and they will come back, and they'll come back strong. People who are thinking live events are going to die, as soon as we can get together, people are going to get on planes, we're going to get together. This could be 6 months, it could be 18 months, but it's going to happen. But when they do, this hybrid option is going to be more common, and meeting planners are going to put a focus on that at-home audience to make sure they're providing a great experience. Because here's the thing, God forbid this ever happens again, or you have an area of the world where something happens where people can't travel, then the meeting planners can flick the switch, bring people to their online option that is already set up, not a scramble, not a bunch of talking heads doing, whatever, but an actual hosted hybrid experience or just virtual experience. So I think the position of online conference host is going to become a thing that we had thought it was going to happen 5 years ago. I think it's going to be a thing.
Very, very insightful. I completely agree. I never thought about it that way, but I completely agree with you. One question I want to ask, and I'm asking a lot of folks right now in this time period, and by the way, you get an A+ on this question. How much has your homepage changed? How much have your topic lists changed in response to the current crisis? And you have a fantastic, the first keynote that's listed on your keynotes page is about social tightening. When did you see the writing on the wall? When did you realize that, hey, I may want to flex my topics and my focus, still taking that relationship piece, but now putting it in a whole new container and a whole new context?
So I don't know if it was, let's call it 3.5 weeks ago. It was a Monday in early March. Okay. I was at what now is my last conference where I was a speaker, kind of a faculty member. It was a podcast event. And I was one of the podcast faculty. So I spoke, I was on panels, I was hosting table discussions. And I didn't know it was going to be my last live event for a long time. But it started on Monday morning. I flew out because it was in California. I was able to take a 6:00 flight, get there by the 9:00 kickoff. And from the time I sat down at the table at 9:00 until the end of the day, my entire March and April calendar had cleared. Something like 6 or 7 events had just wiped away, postponed. A couple were canceled. It was also in the same days that South by Southwest was canceled a few days earlier. And I live in Austin, so the South by Southwest cancellation, which wasn't the first big conference in the world canceled, but it was the one that got the most attention because of what South by Southwest is. It was very clear that something was going to be wrong. And I have a daughter who was supposed to get married in May. Her wedding has since been postponed. I have a daughter who is graduating from high school in May. That, of course, has been, canceled. All of these things were happening in a day while I'm sitting as a faculty member at a conference. And I realized that, can I call myself a keynote speaker if there's nowhere to keynote? And on my website, while lots of speakers are like, oh, call yourself an expert, do this. Hey, I keynote speak. I have a traditional speaker model with some EmCee work that I do. That's my business. It has been for 11 years, plus what I did part-time. I'm proud of being a keynoter, but my website literally said like engaging keynote speaker. Well, I knew that for this foreseeable future, nobody was seeking that. So I changed the headline to Human Connections Catalyst. Now, I've used this term, the conference catalyst, forever, but the conference catalyst doesn't necessarily mean anything when you're not having conferences. So I changed the headline. And then I also looked at what my topics were. And one of my topics is this gap between potential and performance. And it's about plans, purpose, and people. So I still have the networking piece to it. People aren't worried about performance per se or their potential. They're worried about surviving, keeping their job, and paying their rent. So that wasn't going to be important. This whole idea of connecting with people in a gadget crazy world, it's still a good topic. I call it the secret weapon, but from the standpoint of a live presentation, maybe not where people are going. So I added a topic called social tightening, how to connect while social distancing. And I did that because the term social distancing that week was being thrown around on every newscast. And I thought, well, yeah, we have to do this. I'm all about it. As soon as I left that conference, I haven't seen another human being for the most part, besides my wife and daughter who lives with us. That being said, if we have to social distance, I got really worried because I've been teaching this whole idea that people matter. You got to choose people in a world of digital. It can get really scary for some. This was no longer an introvert extrovert thing. This was about humanity. And I got really concerned. And I just literally was like, we have to tighten relationships while we're at home. And so we hadn't even gone to shelter in place or quarantine yet. And I started using the term. It hasn't caught on. Social tightening hasn't gone viral, but it's what I have been trying to have my message be to everybody is, what are we doing? So I'm reaching out to clients. I'm saying, hey, speakers are freaking out because we're losing business. If you cancel an event, that's one thing for me as a meeting planner. And by the way, I'm married to a meeting planner. As a meeting planner, they're having to cancel 50 or 100 things. We speakers see our own things getting canceled and go, ah. But if you're an event planner, you spend 2 years planning some of these events, and then to have to dismantle them in a matter of days and hopefully come up with maybe a virtual option or maybe a time when your convention center is available. Your world's harder than mine. I mean, financially, yeah, my calendar wiped, but I just don't show up. Once they cancel an event, I'm done for that day. The meeting planners have it way worse. And so I've just been reaching out, trying to say, I understand, I'm here. What can I do? I'm not trying to sell them a virtual option, but I'm trying to, I've interviewed 500 people. If you're creating content, can I help you? Some are saying yes. Some are saying thank you, no thank you. Some aren't responding. Some have said yes, and they're paying me. Now, they're not paying me a lot, but I'm trying to be that human to friends, family, neighbors, clients, prospects. I mean, any category of people who are, human beings. That's all I got is how do I connect with them? And that's what I teach. So I'm just trying to be that person who's reminding people, let's have more humanity and less Kardashian in this time. And I'm not picking on the Kardashians, but we have this celebrity focused world. It's not about who's the most famous speaker anymore. It's who's the most human person. Sorry, that was a rant.
No, that was great. People needed to hear all of that. And it's funny because I just said this to a couple of clients about the meeting planners and about the events and the conference business. I said, we've lost tens or hundreds of thousands. They've lost millions or tens of millions.
It's unreal. A lot of these associations, especially smaller ones, they're worried about staying fiscally stable. Associations are worried about going bankrupt because they make their entire year off of their 4-day event. That's where they make all of their money that supports a staff of 20. It supports all they do for thousands of members. And it's so intricately put together. And I'm surprised how many people who are vendors to the meetings world don't realize all the other pieces. And I'm not picking on speakers. Speakers, we see our 1-hour time slot on the stage.
Right.
That is like 0.01% of what they're really worried about. And now everything is blowing up. And, so I'm just trying to be a connector where I can. A couple of clients have reached out to me and said, we're looking for some content. And it's not my content, right? They're not saying, Tom, we want someone to talk about how to connect in this world. Although one of the ones they're asking me to do is social tightening, how to stay in touch with coworkers and clients in this time. Right. Fortunately, the things you do already exist. We have all the tools. We don't have to reinvent the tools. We have email, we have telephones, we have social media. But they're asking me for, do you have someone who can speak on stress management? Do you have someone who can speak on how to use Zoom? They're coming up with topics that matter to them. The mistake would be for me to say, oh, yes, I am an expert in that. I could talk to you about stress. You know why? Because I'm stressed out right now. No, I say, hey, let me introduce you to Eliz Green, or let me introduce you to so-and-so. And that is what they need. They need someone who's that. And then they're like, our budget is only X. Great. Let me make the call. And I've been calling speakers saying, will you do this for free or cheap for this client of mine? And most people are saying, yes.
What a great episode. Wowza. Tell you what, if you want to ramp up your revenue as an expert who speaks professionally, you should really check out our free online training at doitmarketing.com/webinar. I was talking to Meredith Elliott Powell.
She's awesome.
Colleague. Isn't she great?
She is awesome.
And the soundbite that she shared that echoes it perfectly what you're saying is that clients and people in general will never forget what you did during this time. If you handle it great and you're coming to them with a spirit of service and generosity and abundance, they will never forget that. If you show up selfish, but my contract says, no, I'm keeping your deposit because the clause says, right? And you're a jerk and you're selfish and you're there to monetize before you're there to help, they will never forget that either.
And I agree with Meredith because she's brilliant. I agree with you because you're brilliant. I do think there are some people who will forget because we are human beings. If you go out and serve and give, not everybody will serve and give back. It's just the way the world works. I've taught people for years in this whole networking concept that you have to go out and help people who are looking for jobs, help people meet another speaker. They don't always have to hire you. Every time I give a speech, I took this from Ross Bernstein 10 years ago. Every time I complete a speech, I tell the meeting planner, I know two things are true. You're having a conference next year and you probably don't want the same keynoter. Now, they might want me as the MC, they may want the conference catalyst, but very rarely do I keynote 2 years in a row. So I say, now that I know your group, let me help you find other speakers. I have a page on my website where I list 15 speakers I've vetted who are awesome, and I send that out all the time. Some of those other speakers do the same for me. Some of them don't. Some of those meeting planners say, oh my God, yes, thank you. Some of them use those people, some don't. Some say thank you, some don't. We're human beings. Not everybody is going to reward you for being a giver, but right. Bob Berg says it right. He's like, if you're a go-giver, if you're the person who's out there giving, yeah, you're not going to get tit for tat. You can't keep score, but you're going to get more than you would have otherwise.
Right.
And the last thing on this sort of content is be careful about over-marketing. I mean, I'm marketing. I'm using social media. I'm saying stuff. I'm on your podcast. I received last week 100 emails inviting, maybe just less. I didn't count them exactly, but it was well over 50, inviting me to webinars. And my email is filling to capacity daily with newsletters. I think we need less broadcast and more personal. And I think if you're going to be remembered for what Meredith and you were just saying, I think it's going to be remembered because you called and said, I don't know what I can do, but I'm here. And talking about, I remember working for you last year at this place, so that it's not a cut and paste broadcast, that they know you're talking to them.
Right.
I think your chances of them remember it go way up than if you send a newsletter that says it.
Oh, yeah. Big time. Well, let's talk about just the final couple of topics here. Number one is, what are you evaluating as a couple of next steps? And one thing I wanted to ask you about also in that same vein, do you have like a done for you podcast where companies hire you to host their corporate podcast? Is that a thing, or has that been, or should that be a new offer in your toolkit?
So for the last year, I've hosted a show called the Digital Enterprise Society Podcast. It is a technology organization in the world of what's called PLM software, product lifecycle management. It's in design and manufacturing. And I'll be honest, I'm not a software design manufacturing expert. I had keynoted their conference and then emceed it. I keynoted it twice and emceed it 3 times over a 4-year period. And they were looking to put together a podcast a year ago. And they called and asked me if they could pay me for consulting to help them set up the podcast. And I said, no, but I will help you. And I walked them through everything they needed to do. They then came back to me on their idea and said, would you co-host it? So they paired me up with one of their volunteers who is an expert in what they do. But the thought was, if he took another job, he's retired, but if he took another job or a consulting thing that suddenly made him a conflict of interest, they would lose their host. If they gave it to a staff member who was maybe young, who gets another job, they would lose their host. So they signed a long-term contract with me and I host their show. Would I love to host like 5 association podcasts? My God, yes. But again, it's not something people are necessarily looking for. It's kind of like that MC role or that virtual MC role where people are like, well, we could just get Bobby to host it. He has a good personality because we'd save money. There's not a big market for an exterior podcast host, but we've now done a year's worth of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, and I love working with them.
Yeah, that's really great. So are you looking at doing some other things short-term or maybe long-term, coaching, consulting, doing video series, doing webinar series for your clients? What's on the menu and what appeals to you and what would you not want to touch with a 10-foot pole?
I don't know the answer to that, David. I listen to a lot of people in the speaking world, the podcast world, the consulting world who are like, I've totally repivoted and retooled. And I'm like, God, they must be so much smarter than I am or something. So I have, for the past 2 weeks, made it a point to every day have a conversation with someone smart. And it doesn't mean they're from our industry. Lots of times they're from other industries. We have some people in our association, in our world, who are multi-millionaires. And they're like, oh, I hate not working, but the mortgage gets paid. I've got to figure out a way to pay for college. Kate starts college, hopefully in the fall, if college kids are allowed to go to college in the fall. So I have to work. I have to earn money. My wife is a meeting planner for an association. She's an hourly resource. So her hours have dropped drastically. So I have to get scrappy. I have to look for things. I've done coaching in my life. I'm kind of the anti-coach because I respect you. I don't want to do what you do the way you do it. So I tend to negotiate like special deals for everybody based on where they are and who they are. And it looks like, a hodgepodge of things for pricing and time and everything else, because I don't want to do that. I don't know that consulting is my thing, because what I teach isn't what people are hiring consultants for. It's like, how do you connect with people? Yeah, I can do a training on it, but I don't know that it's like ongoing consulting. Do I get a full-time job? Well, that's out of the thing right now, because who's hiring, in any industry. I did throw something out to a couple of friends, or they threw it out to me. And they said, a lot of entrepreneurial businesses, and I live in Austin, there's a lot of tech companies, a lot of tech services companies. They would love to have someone like the law firms and the consulting firms had in me 15 years ago, but they can't afford you, right? You're too expensive. They can't afford to have that. What if they could have a third of your time? And I was like, what do you mean? They said, what if they hired you to come and be their director of marketing and business development, and you managed a team, but you only gave them 15 hours a week? And I was like, oh, I could do that forever. Because even with a robust speaking career, I got 15 hours in my week. So would I be open to it if somebody called me and said, I want to partner with you, but I can't afford a full-time salary, but I can put you on the payroll, maybe give you a salary. Maybe that includes benefits. That'd be freaking awesome. And there's flexibility that, yeah, I work every Tuesday and Wednesday, but if I have an EmCee gig and I'm gone, I can come in on Friday. I'm open. It was an idea that one of these smart people gave me. Is there a world for virtual stuff? Sure. I've been hired to do a couple of virtual things. Will that grow? I don't know. All these people who are like, I'm now a virtual speaker. If we get off quarantine in 6 weeks and by October people are back, people may not be looking for a virtual keynoter. So is a giant pivot what I need to do until I know what the world looks like? Probably not.
So I love that virtual CMO idea, right? Fractional CMO. It's like fractional jet ownership. You can't buy the private jet, but you can ride the private jet to get you where you want to go. And then a couple other people might use that private jet as well. So there you are, Thom Singer, professional speaker and virtual chief marketing officer.
I can do sales too. I'm scrappy, man.
Oh yeah, virtual CSO, CRO.
And I think any speaker right now who isn't latching on to the word grit and scrappy is going to miss the boat. I think we have to be scrappy. We have to be gritty. This is why I'm talking to smart people every day. I can make up what's happening in the world, but I'm one person and I'm not that smart. I need other people to give me, if I get 40 people to tell me, here are ideas, one of them has to be the right one.
Exactly. I love it. Well, if people were to take one central idea from our conversation today about networking, about relationships, about staying connected in this crazy virtual world, especially now in this crazy upside down virtual world, what would your one overall parting piece of wisdom be about staying connected?
Every single day during this quarantine time, and maybe long after it's over, reach out to 10 people just to touch base and see how they're doing. Because here's the thing, David, before this all started, there was already an epidemic of loneliness going on. Dr. Vivek Murthy, who was the 19th Surgeon General of the United States under Obama, is about to release a book in April called Together, or maybe it's Togetherness, I forget. But it comes out of an article he wrote in HBR 2 years ago about the epidemic of loneliness. 20% of Americans, and higher in some other countries, admit to being lonely some of the time or all of the time. This is a problem. We have this connected world where we have these phones. People think, oh, how could you be lonely? You just tweet. Well, people feel more disconnected. So this social distancing, for some people, they're handling it fine. For some people, they're not. But people aren't raising their hands necessarily going, I'm miserable. The only way you can do it is if you honestly and openly reach out. So I've made a goal to reach out to 10 people a day, whether it's by phone, email, or text, or social media DM, where I just say, I'm trying to reach out to people and see how they're doing. I'm thinking of you. Again, this isn't a cut and paste. I'm trying to be personal. I loved being at this conference with you, or I love being an NSA member with you, just thinking of you. And every day, reach out to 10 people. And even if they don't need it, they'll appreciate it. If they need it, they'll appreciate it. I had one person say to me, I don't need that. And I said, great, you don't need it. Everyone in your network, you think they're all doing 100% fine with this? Don't be selfish either. If you don't need to reach out to people or you're more introverted or shy, get over it. Reach out every single day. Maybe one of those people will be the person who gives you that idea or hires you or does something. Maybe not. But you do no harm by telling 10 people a day, I care.
Amen. Times 10. Let's tell people where to get connected and stay connected to more Thom Singer brilliance. Where do we send people? Website, blog, podcast, lay it on us. We're going to have this in the links right below in the show notes when you go to thespeakingshow.com. Under this episode, Thom Singer, where can we send people?
Yeah, I think Thom Singer brilliance might be like a really thin pie, but just the same, you can find me at thomsinger.com. That's THOM, singer.com. Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do is my podcast. You can find that on Apple Podcasts, on Stitcher, on Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcast love. Also at thomsinger.com/podcast. That was clever. So you can do that. I'm on all the social medias at Thom Singer, THOMSINGER.com. And people, especially if you're a speaker, and you're feeling disconnected and lonely or scared, send me an email or call me directly. My actual phone number is on my website. I'm not famous. It doesn't ring that much. And I'm willing to brainstorm or talk or just be that person that you cry to anytime.
Hugely generous offer, my friend. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We have to have you back, and we'll catch up on all things Thom Singer in a follow-up episode, TBA. Dun, dun, dun. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Speaking Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on iTunes. Subscribe. Tell a friend. Go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thespeakingshow.com. See you next time.